everybody. I'm Amy Anam Cara, and welcome to our interview today with Rebecca Struzyna. Rebecca is the creator and host of the West London Witch podcast. Although Rebecca was born and currently resides in England, she grew up and spent most of her life in Southern California. Rebecca grew up in the theater and gained her Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Acting from California State University, Fullerton, before moving to London and creating the West London Witch podcast, a podcast dedicated to all things paranormal, supernatural, and unexplained. When Rebecca is not doing voice acting for audiobooks and various other podcasts, she loves to read, hike, bake, and spend time with her puppy Nala in their little cottage in the woods. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi there. How are you today?
I'm well. What's going on there in London? I can't even believe I'm doing an interview with somebody in London. This is so awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. So actually, although we're called the West London Witch, when we did live in West London for many, many years, this summer after COVID hit, we thought we need to get to the country. We need to get out of the city. So I still work in the city, but we now live in Winchester, which is a historic part of Southern England. It used to be the old Roman capital of England. And it's where Winchester Cathedral is. It's where Jane Austen is from. And it's a beautifully preserved historic little town in Southern England.
It's amazing.
And it's really quite idyllic. Yeah, it's a really lovely place, actually. So we've still got serious ties to London. I'm still there every day of the week. I was there till late last night, but we've kind of hidden away to the country a little bit.
That's amazing. I think you said your house is kind of like Hansel and Gretel. Is it kind of like that?
It is. It's very...
Without the witch.
The Wicked Witch in the Woods house, very much so. It definitely looks pretty spooky. Very idyllic, very gorgeous, but definitely has a vibe to it, which we quite like a little.
Yeah.
Character, needless
So
to
I
say.
have to ask, is there someone from the other side living with you?
You know, our nearest neighbors is a very, very old Anglo-Saxon church over back this way. And the church, of course, has a graveyard. And we don't quite know what that original graveyard, how big it would have been, how close it would have got to the house. There is now a field in between us and the church, but we're probably 400 meters from that ancient church and graveyard. So do I think there's someone permanently grounded in this house? No. Do I think that we get some strange activity probably connected to the graveyard? Yes. You often feel as though, almost sometimes as though you kind of surprise each other. You kind of catch something out of the corner of your eye, and as much as it startled you, it startled whatever it was as well.
Right.
So I wonder if this house being so close to the graveyard, with us being here and, always talking about the paranormal and being very accepting of the paranormal, I wonder if we're a little bit of a beacon, and sometimes things get lost or confused or curious and kind of end up in the house unexpectedly. But nothing here is scary, depending on who you ask.
Right.
So, yeah, I definitely think there is a spirited house, but if it's a residential spirit, that I'm not quite so convinced of.
Got it. So, Rebecca, tell me about your earliest paranormal experiences.
Well, both of my parents, in fact, our whole family is quite superstitious and true believers in the paranormal. And when I was 3 years old, when my parents moved from Southern California up to the Central Valley, they ended up falling in love with this old, beautiful turn of the century craftsman style home. And it was in downtown Bakersfield, beautiful porch on the front, these gorgeous palm trees. It had been really it had been neglected, but in a way that was kind of a blessing because it had retained all of its original finishings.
Right.
So the inside was, really took you back in time to that turn of the century arts and crafts style home.
Right.
Well, my parents fell in love with it and they moved us into this home in downtown Bakersfield. But as soon as they did, things were not right. It first started with our dog. We had a little toy poodle named Busta, who we actually brought from England with us.
Mm-hmm.
And him and I were inseparable. But as soon as we moved into that house, he acted very strange. He refused to go into my bedroom, which was really alarming for my parents because he slept with me every single night. But as soon as we moved into that house, he refused to go into my room.
Well, that must have been heartbreaking as a little girl, right?
Yeah. And I think maybe that also added to it because for the first time ever, I slept alone, where I always slept with the dog. And now I'm sleeping by myself in this bedroom. But he refused to go in there. It wasn't going to happen. He didn't like the back hallway. And then he started having these horrible seizures. And being a toy poodle, he did have seizures every now and then, but these seizures really started to get out of control. And I remember, my mom telling me he had this massive seizure in the living room. He'd gotten all stressed out, had this huge seizure. It lasted like 13, 14 minutes. Wow. And when he came back around, she was just so worried because he really was not himself. And there was no real rhyme or reason for it. The vet didn't have any explanation for this change in behavior. It was all very weird. Then it came to, putting me to bed at night always became this ordeal because I had said to my parents that there was a witch in the closet and I was scared of the witch. And there was people in my room and they were evil people. And I was scared of the evil people. And of course, it was this beautiful, delightful bedroom. There was nothing scary. It was safe. There was nothing to be inherently afraid of.
Right.
So my mom started making a joke out of it. She'd be like, okay, I've checked the closet. There's nothing there. I've looked under the bed. There's nothing there. It's okay. You can go to sleep now. And that would quell me for a little bit. But often my parents would wake up to hear a big thud in the night. And I would be on the floor crying. Aww. And I would say, the witch has pushed me out of my bed. The witch has pushed me out of my bed. And
do you remember seeing the witch?
No, but I do remember, and my mom doesn't remember this, but I remember my mom taking me to the doctor. And I think it was just a regular checkup, chicken pox vaccine or whatever. And I remember my mom being like, well, we're here. I have a question to ask you. We're having a really hard time getting her to go to bed at night. And she's having all these nightmares and night terrors and sleepwalking and falling out of the bed. And she says that there's people in the room. Could that be something? And the doctor said, oh, she's probably just going through a phase. Kids do this. Kids have nightmares. It's no big deal. And my mom said, yeah, but I don't know. It just feels like more than that. And I remember the doctor saying to her, well, do you think there's something going on in that room? Like, do you think there's something there? And my mom being like, I don't know. Thank you very much. Take care. Because what do you say?
Right.
And I asked my mom as an adult, I said, why did you let me sleep in the haunted room? Why would you do that? But she said to me, it was a really nice room. There was no explanation, maybe you were having a phase. But as time went on, we've got the dog acting strange. I'm not sleeping. My parents, they'd immigrated to the US. They're living in this house in this town that they don't know anyone in. They're super tight on money. And everything was very stressful. And their marriage started to deteriorate. And it could be the culmination of being new, not knowing anyone, not having any money, not sleeping, being stressed out about your dog. There are tons of external factors as to why they could have been in a bad place. But on top of that, there started to be this just undercurrent of fear that was kind of permeating throughout everything that they were doing in the home. Particularly my bedroom. Even my mom started to get this feeling like, ooh, really, it doesn't feel good in here. And when I would say to her, I'm scared, she would kind of be like, I understand that. Mm-hmm. And that must have been a strange moment for a mom to have as well. And then the kitchen was a lovely, beautiful kitchen. But according to my parents, they always felt as though there was someone watching them. Particularly, they would be standing at the sink and they'd get this feeling that someone was behind them, and they would, turn around. There was no one there. And a few minutes later, turn around, and just this feeling that you were never alone and you were always being watched. It felt sinister. And after 4 months, my parents found somewhere else to move. So it was obviously big enough. It's fast, right?
Yeah.
And that's not typical. With the podcast, I talk to many people who have lived in very scary, very spirited houses. But the reality of it is it's not that easy just to pick up and go.
Right.
And so when people say, why didn't you move? Well, because it's not that simple. But they did. They moved. But when they were cleaning out the house, my dad was there alone, and he's cleaning out the kitchen and just, doing a once over. And he said that he felt someone staring at him, and he turned around, and in the doorway to the kitchen was a full-bodied apparition of a woman staring at him. And he was so terrified because it was, that, oh my goodness, I'm seeing this, but also confirmation that for all those months that they've been feeling that, there actually had been someone there.
Right.
And he said that he left the keys on the table to the house. He just left. He bolted out. He jumped over the back fence and drove to the new house. And my mom said she'd never seen anyone so white in her life. He was just pasty white, full flop sweat. She was terrified he had driven. She was like, I can't believe you drove. How dare you get into a car in this state? And he was terrified, absolutely terrified. And he said, I saw a woman in our house. Well, that's a scary story in and of itself. But we'd moved at Christmas time, and my uncle had sent our Christmas presents to the wrong house. He'd sent them to that house.
Oh, no.
So my mom goes to the house, and this woman opens the door, and my mom says, hi, we used to live here. My brother sent the presents, blah, blah, blah. And the woman said, well, I've actually sent them back because I didn't know who you were. So I sent them back to England.
Bummer.
But I've been doing a lot of work on this house. Do you want to come in and see it? And my mom was like, of course I want to come in and see the house. Because like I said, it had been neglected. So it needed a lot of work doing to it, but the old bones were still, really well intact. So it was a great restoration project. And this woman had really put a lot of time and love and money into restoring this home. And she sits my mom down on the sofa, and they are having a cup of coffee. And this woman just turns to my mom and says to her, this house is haunted, right? And my mom sits there silently, going through her head thinking, yes, I do know this house is haunted, but also, do I want to tell that to this woman who's just put all this time and love and money into restoring this house that for us was a very unpleasant home?
Right.
And so my mom very delicately says, well, it wasn't the right house for us. And we didn't have great vibes in this home, but, that was just our experience. And the woman says, oh, no, this house is haunted. But the spirits, they really like us, and we're very happy here. And my mom was like, oh, okay.
She didn't like us.
Yeah, they did. They're not fans of us. And the woman said the room that was troublesome for us was the middle bedroom where our son slept. And that was my bedroom. And she told my mom, as soon as we moved into this house, he was saying that there was evil people in the room. He used the exact same terminology. The exact same terminology, which is strange for a toddler to use.
Right.
The word evil is a really weird word for a toddler to use. But she said, that room does have a feeling, and we've been dealing with that, but I really like this house. And that was always the story for many years, that, my mom would pick up the presents and the house was confirmed as haunted. Well, I was doing theater in downtown Bakersfield, and it's a small town, we're only a few streets away from that house, really. And we're all in the basement, and someone said, hey, Becca, didn't you guys live in a haunted house? And I said, yeah. And I tell that story. And as I'm done telling this story, I look up and there's this kid sitting there. I mean, sheet white. And this is the really scary part. He made this even scarier. He just looks me in the eyes and he goes, I was the little boy who slept.
I knew you were going to say that.
Mm-hmm. And
I just got the chills.
Isn't that the weirdest thing? And then it comes to the show day, and his mom and my mom meet in the lobby, and it was them. And so my mom said, what's the next chapter of this story?
Right.
What happened after we met? And at this point, it's been like, 10, 12 years, a decade later. And she said that they lived there for a very long time. And she was very comfortable in that house, but the family wasn't so comfortable. And the son had told me they were having a lot of poltergeist activity. Things were going missing, things were disappearing, things were flying across the room. You'd open up a cupboard, all the clothes would be on the floor, pictures upside down. And so the family moved out. But she retained the house and she used it as her office. But then she was having strange happenings. Although she was fine there, her staff were having strange happenings. And they were really scared, that you're sitting in your office and all of a sudden, paper clips are flying across the room and there's all this inexplicable activity and it feels as though it doesn't want you there. That's not a great working environment. So she ended up moving her office to another office downtown. But she still owned the house. And that was kind of the story. Well, when I decided to start the podcast, I thought this is a great first episode because you talk to my mom and dad. They'll be very understanding if everything goes terribly wrong and we've got to re-record it 20 times. I can kind of have a first go at things. And as I'm doing this, I think, well, I need to reach out to this woman and see if I can get a hold of her and connect with her about this house. And I go on Facebook and I find her and I send her this very strange message saying who I am and what I'm doing and will you talk to me? And when you're trying to reach out to people about paranormal, you either get 3 responses. Absolutely, yes. When can we talk? Absolutely not. I'm not going to do this. Or nothing at all. No response whatsoever. And she messaged me back and she said, I remember your mom. I remember you guys. Yes. And she said that she still owned the house to this day. Her son and daughter-in-law and their children live in the house and they're very happy there.
Interesting.
Totally fine. But she agreed that the house was in fact haunted and that just because they were happy there didn't mean it wasn't haunted. It just meant that there was this level of balance that perhaps had been struck in the home. And it was really fascinating to kind of touch base with her again all these years later, because it just affirmed that there really was stuff going on there. And it wasn't just us that experienced and all the things that we'd used to rationalize it, me not being able to sleep, my dog just having a funny 5 minutes, or, the stress of being in a new place. That could all be factors, of course, but there was also another explanation. So that was my first kind of paranormal experience.
And so through your life though, have you had other experiences?
I have.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just because I grew up in a very spiritual home and my parents were very open and accepting and we were never told that there wasn't ghosts. We were always told there were. My mom is very, very sensitive to energies and to just the spaces around her. She's just so receptive and sensitive. So I think I've got some of that passed down on to me, but I also think I have to question myself if, because I believe in these things and because I'm so open to them, if I have more experiences, because that light's kind of on and it's kind of alerting the spirit world, like, hey, this girl's receptive.
You're right.
Reach out to her. It's worth your time. She'll recognize it. She'll notice it. So I have even a funny one the other day. This one was weird. We went out for birthday drinks for my cousin. And we ended up going to this very old pub. I think it's one of the oldest pubs in Winchester, actually. And we're in the pub and, full disclosure, we had some drinks. We'd been out for her birthday.
Yes.
But hadn't had that many drinks. I'm an old woman these days. I'm not, in college partying like we used to do.
Right.
So I'd ordered a drink, and it was in this really big, heavy glass. I actually thought at the time, this is a really excessively heavy glass. It's the end of the night. You're waiting for people to start smashing glasses, aren't you?
Right.
We go to this table, we set the drink down, and I'm actually standing talking to this woman. I'll talk to anyone. I'm just chatting to this lady.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
And as we're standing there chatting, my drink, which I hadn't even had a sip of yet, comes flying off the table and just douses me in vodka soda, and the glass is gone. Can't find the glass anywhere. And I'm mortified because, everyone in the bar just turns and looks. And I can honestly say, I was nowhere near it. I'm chatting to this woman. The glass is on the table. Well, all of a sudden this waitress comes over, and I'm like, I am so sorry. I have no explanation for what's occurred here. And I don't know where the glass went. I'm really sorry. And she's like, oh, it's under the table. I'm like, oh. And I look, and there it is, sitting upright, completely under the table, just sitting there.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's odd. And I said, I'm really sorry. I know we've had a few drinks, but I really have not touched that glass. And she goes, oh, no. It just came flying off the table, didn't it? And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, I'll get you another one. And that's not normal bar behavior. When you spill your drink in a bar, people aren't getting you any drink. And she comes back over, and I said, I'm really, really sorry. And so embarrassed. And she's like, oh no, this table's haunted. That happens to people. Their drinks go flying off the table. That's why I knew where the glass was. That's why I knew it wasn't your fault. So I'm giving you another drink because, that's what happens at this table. And my cousin just went, well, it would of course happen to you, wouldn't it? Of course, you would be the person the drink would go flying off the table.
Sure. Yeah.
And I do think that there is an element of that. If you're receptive, then maybe you do experience more things.
Right.
So,
I do believe that. So let's talk about your podcast.
Yeah.
So, this is not like your job. This is something that you just decided to start, right? And I kind of went back into your podcast, and you've done about 31 episodes, right? And you started in August of 2020, the year of COVID, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, I know you do voiceovers and acting. So how did the podcast come about, and why this topic?
So I got the idea in about April 2020. So I teach performing arts. I teach theater and dance. And I was teaching from home in our living room in London. We were living in Richmond in West London at this time. We had a very beautiful house, but it's a 2-bedroom flat. We had no yard. We fortunately lived next to the Royal Park. So we were able to, we didn't have it. I'm not saying we were as unfortunate as some people living in the city. We definitely were able to go out with our dog and be by the river and be in the park. But I was just feeling really stifled creatively, because teaching online is not the same as teaching in person.
Because everybody was in lockdown, right? You guys were in lockdown.
Yeah, everyone's in lockdown. We're doing Zoom classes. Yeah. The goalposts change. A lot of my students are, working towards universities or working professionally on the West End or doing television and film. And that just wasn't happening. So I was feeling really creatively just stifled.
Yeah.
And I love podcasts and audiobooks. I was a terrible reader when I was growing up. I really couldn't read very well until about the 4th grade. But because I did theater, I had to memorize lines. And I would have my parents read me the script once, and I would have to memorize it in that one time, because I was so ashamed I couldn't read very well. And also, your parents aren't going to sit there and read you the lines over and over and over and over and over. And that's ridiculous. So I had near photographic memory when it came to text. And I love just the oral tradition. I love my parents telling me stories. My dad read all the Harry Potter books aloud to us, and we read as a family aloud. And that was a really formative part of my life. So I love podcasts. I love audiobooks, but I am terrible with computers. I'm terrible with technology. And when you do a podcast or a YouTube channel, you've got to choose something that you really love and you can talk about for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on end.
Right.
And I didn't want to do anything about the arts or theater because I do that all day. I need an escape, particularly during COVID.
Yeah.
And I needed to chat to people who were not my students and who were not, my
Right.
family. I needed to chat to strangers, as crazy as that sounds. So I had this idea that I would do a paranormal podcast because I love the paranormal. It's a big, wide open topic. So I can kind of dabble in true crime like we do, other supernatural things. It doesn't have to just be about ghosts or haunted houses. It's a wide enough topic that we've got lots of latitude, and it's just so fascinating to me. So I thought, that's the topic. Great. But then I had a million excuses not to do it. I didn't have the software. I didn't have the microphone. I didn't know how to use Logic or GarageBand.
Fear.
And it was really, really, it's the great inhibitor, right? So I was actually having a voice lesson on Zoom with Sinead Bowers, who actually works on the show with us. She's one of my best friends. She's an amazing vocal coach. And I said to her, I've had this idea. I'm going to start a podcast. And she's like, great. When are you going to start it? And I was like, oh, well, I've got to figure this out. I got to do that or da. And Sinead is just this beautiful, ball of sunshine and joy. She really is just perpetual light. And she turned to me and she's like, no, those are all excuses. It's progress over perfection. It doesn't need to be perfect, but you need to get it started. You have no excuses. Start it today. Do it today. And I was so taken back. I've never heard my friend be this sharp.
Right. Direct.
And commanding. And I thought, God, she really called me out on all my, for lack of a better word, all the bullshit excuses I was putting on. Right. She really called me out. And I did. I sat down that night and I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And it was so freeing because from the podcast, I was able to chat to people all over the globe, back in California or in Connecticut or in Iceland.
It's cool. I know.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
So, and I've learned so many different things, particularly when we do history episodes, because I have to teach myself all the history as well. So it's just been a really wonderful way of connecting to other people all over the globe. And it was born out of just the stifling oppression that being locked down during COVID really, put us all under, really.
Right.
So that's the genesis of it all.
Right. And, it's, entertainment, but at the same time, you're giving people a place to talk about something that they probably haven't talked about to a lot of people. With somebody that understands. So it benefits them as well, right?
I like to think so. We've had a few episodes. Episode 2, for example, the woman in that story, she lived in this haunted house and she was severely teased and bullied at school. And she was the weird kid with the weird parents in the haunted house. And I think, sometimes we forget when it comes to the paranormal, some of these experiences are really traumatizing for people.
Yes.
And they don't want to talk about it because they've been dismissed so many times. Well, obviously it wasn't that, it was the electricity, or it wasn't that, it was the wind. You have bad pipes or whatever. And some people feel like, well, I know what I know. I heard what I heard. I saw what I saw. But when you come upon people who are so closed-minded, that can be really, can shut you off and it can be really dismissive. So I like to think that for some people, it's a place where they can be heard and understood and, not being judged. And on the flip side of that, not everything is ghosts. Sometimes I hear a story and I think, maybe that was just strange. Or I have to say that to myself when something weird happens in the house.
Right.
This is a 200-year-old cottage. Things are strange sometimes. It's no big deal. So, we do have to have a healthy level of skepticism, but there's not been anyone on the podcast who I have not wholeheartedly believed that was their experience. And I'm so grateful for them to be so vulnerable and to share that with me. Yeah. I know that takes a lot of courage sometimes.
Absolutely. I love, I love your intro. I love your teasers in the beginning of the podcast. I mean, I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts, but I do listen to yours. I'm so entertained by them. I love the guests. I love how you just piece everything together. You just do such a really, really nice job. And that's one of the reasons why I chose you. And I'm so blessed that you said yes to me. This is amazing. So what do you have working in the future? Are you going to keep doing the podcasts?
Yes. So the podcast, obviously it's a big undertaking because it's not just a chat show, it's story driven, it's narrative driven.
Right.
So I get the story, and sometimes they're very linear. Sometimes they're all over the place, and it takes a lot of brain power to figure out, how do I make this one cohesive narrative? Then I also do all the writing for it, which is a lot of creative writing. And I feel that's a big hole in my education, actually. I am still confounded on how I graduated with a bachelor's of fine arts in acting, and I never took a playwriting class. How is that possible? So I feel like I am an exceptional writer. I mean, if you want to get out of your parking ticket, I'm your woman. You're not going to pay. But if you want
right.
a creative, narrative, I really struggle with that. So that's each one of those intros for me is a task and an undertaking. So it's a pretty labor intensive podcast. There's all the writing, there's all the editing. And then that's just on my end. Then it goes to Danny in the studio, and he writes original scores for every single episode. He mixes and masters it. He deals with strange, edits and audio bits and things that is way beyond my comprehension. So it takes a lot of time for just one episode to come out, hence why it's every other week and why we have to take breaks, because it's so labor intensive.
Right.
But I absolutely love it. I love the journey. So definitely are going to continue with it. Hope that it, continues to glean great listeners and that it can just grow. But I've always called it my field of dreams. I'm very patient with it. I believe that if I build it, they will come. And for all of our shows, I think so. I like to think, our mission statement has always been just to put out the best storytelling we possibly can in the best quality that's physically possible. So that's always been the goal. That's the mission. That's the drive. And I truly believe all things in their own time. So the podcast will continue, hopefully, to grow and evolve and reach more people and be able to provide just a great place to escape from reality for 45 minutes.
Yeah,
so that's the goal.
Great. That's great. Well, Rebecca, I am so pleased that you said yes to me. So blessed. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking about yourself and talking about your podcast. And I'm going to share your podcast with other folks. Yeah. And I guess that's it here. And I thank all my viewers for watching, and check out Rebecca at the West London Witch Podcast. What is it on? It's on Spotify. What else?
Everywhere, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, it's there. So Spotify, Apple, Google, any random RSS feeds, wherever you listen, it is there.
Okay. And are you looking for stories?
I'm always looking for stories. Okay. Yes. As I say at the end of every episode, if you have a spooky story that you would like to share, I would love to hear it. So you can always drop us a line on Instagram or Facebook at The West London Witch, or email us at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Have
a great day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. And if you like this video, be sure to like and comment and share and subscribe and watch my other videos and all that good stuff. Yay!